Hello, my friends. It's your old buddy Dragos. And I just wanted to reach out because I don't know how the weather is where you live, but here it is starting to warm up. Things are becoming toasty. People are getting a little antsy, a little squirrely to get out there and have some fun. And there's something in the air. I don't know if you can feel it, but I smell revolution. Yes, the revolution. Things get crazy when it gets hot. People aren't afraid to say what's bothering them. And I thought this might be a good chance to talk about some of the famous, but maybe a little more forgotten revolutions in history. So join me, won't you, as we talk about revolution. Now, the first revolution I'd like to talk about is the walking plague of 1348. This occurred in Austria, and this was in a time when Protestants and Catholics were not allowed by their churches to be buried together. Well, it seemed that this practice became so common that the dead started coming back to life. And in unison, they ended up marching to the front of all the graveyards. Protestants at Catholic graveyards, Catholics at Protestant graveyards. It was a mess. They would go to any graveyard they wanted, and they would kill anyone who was in their way. Now, when they got to these graveyards, the bodies would lie down and immediately die again. The bodies began stacking up so much that there was a horrible smell across town. And it was realized that they had to basically bury these bodies wherever they were. They were already, rotting and getting all weepy, like an old pineapple on the counter. You don't want to have to move that. So the churches decided to just rebury the bodies right where they lay. Now, this is when suddenly the Protestants and Catholics realized, oh, well, maybe we should have been doing this all along. And that's when the Protestants and Catholics both realized, oh, it's okay. Nobody cares where the body is buried as long as they're buried. And that tradition disappeared. People could be buried anywhere they want. Now let's talk about the witch revolution of Prague. This happened in 1227 in Prague. You know where Prague is in the Czech Republic? Well, King Vladislav II had died, and he did not have any heirs to the throne. So it was decided at that time that the land would be split up into different groups to be ruled by the Bohemian princes of the area. The Bohemian princes, they were a little bit different. They didn't really care a whole lot about politics. What they wanted was the power. So they would use their royal magicians to fight each other and take little bits of land back and forth. Little petty things if you really think about it. Now, part of that was that they created what was known as the Imperial Coven of Bohemia. And it meant that all witches had to be licensed and bonded before they could do any magic. And of course, just the royal magicians were given that option. All the local witches were left out. They couldn't do anything under threat of, being arrested or beheaded or burnt at the stake. Imagine that, very creative. But the local witches got mad, so they got together and created their own union. They were so upset that the witch union decided to storm all of the royal castles. But they were also smart. Instead of blowing up the castle or something like that, they brought down a plague of frogs across all of the royal castles. Then they turned the royal magicians into frogs. And the traditional way at that time to get rid of frogs was to create a big bonfire and just sweep them in, get rid of all the frogs at once. Well, this fixed both things. Not only did it get rid of the frogs, but it also got rid of the royal magicians. With all of the royal magicians gone and more frogs coming down, the Bohemian princes had nobody to turn to except, of course, for the local witches. So the local witches came in, stopped the reign of frogs, made sure all the frogs were burnt, and everything went back to normal. Apparently there is power in unions. Now let's talk about the Sanguine Revolt of 1307. This happened in Bucharest, which is in Hungary. Now, King Otto of Bavaria was made King of Hungary, and he was not a very popular choice. The Hungarians wanted a Hungarian on the throne. But, what's a peasant to do? So King Otto takes the throne, and he pretty much kept to himself. He was only really concerned with having a good time as noble, as a nobleman. So he let the laws go wild. He really didn't care what happened outside of the castle walls, as long as he was having a good time. Now, so basically, the common person was left starving and poor and to fend for themselves, while the rich people stayed inside the castle and had lavish lives at big parties. You know how that goes. Same old, same old. Now, this was also the height of when vampire hunting started to become popular, so a lot of these nobles would go out and try their hand at vampire hunting. This led to a lot of angry vampires. Now, they weren't so mad because they were being hunted. I mean, the vampires are pretty wily, they can get away, but they were being hunted poorly by people who didn't know what they were doing. So there was a lot of injured vampires and, vampires that were half-staked right. He basically left kind of a crippled vampire society. Well, the vampires got together, and they all attacked the castle at once. The whole region, every vampire came and attacked the castle, just decimated the castle. And the Otto was roasted alive and fed to the humans, who at that point, they were so poor and starving, they didn't really care. But the weird thing is the vampires didn't really care about the throne. They didn't want to establish a vampire as king. They instead wanted to establish another Hungarian. So they pushed for Charles of Anjou to take the throne, which, by the way, he did. Now, Charles of Anjou, he knew how he got the throne, so he was careful to keep the vampires happy. And that led to a treaty which lasted pretty long, about 100 years. That was until 1408 with the decree of the Schonitz silver mines. But that's kind of a story for another day. Now, let's go way back in time to what was known as the Norwegian Lichen Wars of 1066. Now, at that time, Harold III of Norway was about to conquer Denmark and had his eyes aimed on England. His plan was to take a bunch of Norwegian werewolves, release them in Denmark, wait a day, and then come back in with all the people slaughtered and take over the plan. And this did work in Denmark. However, when he went to go towards England, the trip was a lot longer than he thought. And the poor lycanthropes, they were kept in the boats with nothing to eat. So when they pulled up, they were starving. He treated them pretty badly. I mean, he saw them as a tool of war, but they were still sort of living people. So when they got to England, he tried the same thing. He released the werewolves, but the town had already heard about what happened over in Denmark. So when they heard they were being invaded, they got the heck out of town and they went up to the countryside. So here come all these werewolves into the city, and there's nobody there. The king is sitting on his boat, waiting, thinking, everything's going great. A day later, he lands, and here's all these werewolves lined up. They haven't eaten in a very long time, and the only thing that's alive is the king and his soldiers. So guess what the Lycans do? They attack the soldiers! That's right! They attacked the soldiers and ate every one of them. But they were smart as well. They did not eat the king. Instead, they sailed back to Norway, and they negotiated the return of the king to the Norwegian people in exchange for an official decree that said that all local butchers had to keep the lichen colonies fed. If they were soldiers or not, if they were wild or tamed, the local butchers had to keep them all fed, which of course they agreed because they wanted King Harold back. I've heard that this is where hot dogs come from. I don't know, could be true. And finally, here's one for the kids. I think they like this. This was known as the Imp Invasion of London. Now, the Imp Invasion of London took place in 1422. The Dutch King Wilhelm, who was known as Wilhelm the Silent, had given a gift of tulips to the coronation of Henry VI. Henry was just stepping up, Wilhelm gives him all these flowers, and of course Henry loved them. There weren't tulips in England yet, so this was like something crazy fancy, you know? So Henry liked it so much that he ripped up the royal rose garden that was planted by his father, Henry V, and he had it installed with tulips. Well, wow, the people loved it, and the king loved it. This enraged the fairies. You'll never want to get on a fairy's bad side. This enraged the fairies so bad that the fairies came together and they invaded the town of London. For a full month, the milk curdled, the food went rancid, the wine soured, everything they could touch they would destroy. It wasn't until King Henry VI's mother, that's Catherine of Valois, she realized what had happened. She realized what the offense was. And she finally convinced her son that they needed to restore the gardens. So she went in and personally removed all of the tulips. She had new roses planted, good classic English roses, and it's very quickly everything went back to normal. This was when King Henry VI decided that he had to establish the Royal Rose Garden at Windsor Castle as a permanent fixture. He made it official. It was a permanent garden that could not be removed. And Catherine of Valois, she installed a statue by one of the local artists, a lovely statue of an imp sitting in the rose garden that was also put there and could not be removed. I think Catherine knew how to keep those fairies happy. You know, every culture has a revolution once in a while. Sometimes it is cultural, sometimes it is military, sometimes it is political. It's just going to happen. What you can do is keep your eyes open and, of course, fight for what you believe is right. But don't forget, besides humans, there may be other creatures around that could be affected. So next time you pick up your pitchfork and torch to go storm the castle and demand a law, maybe pay attention to who is or who isn't around. Thank you, my friends. I hope you enjoyed that. Have a wonderful summer. Get out there, get in those ponds and lakes, cool yourself down, and have a wonderful time. Goodbye.